Welcome back to the next step. Now before we take that next step, I just want to point out one more time, your plan, it's still wrong. It'll always be wrong, but if you've been working through to this point, at least what we have is a first good idea of the problem and the solution and the customers, right? And if you've been out of the building and you've talked to customers, then you have some idea that what you're building, right, has some validity to it. Now the next thing we should work on is it worth working on? Right? Before you go and build the MVP, before you go and do all that work, is the opportunity before you of a sufficient size and scale and impact that you should care about this, or that anybody should care about this? And so I call this the opportunity sizing exercise, and it begins with two parts: market sizing and pricing. So the next step is called market sizing. Here we're going to understand the market, the total collection of potential customers that will potentially buy your product. All right? So the questions to ask here are, how many customers need this product or service? How many copies will they buy when they buy something? Is this a one-time purchase? Is this a monthly purchase? Did they buy a six-pack? Did they buy a case? Did they buy boxes upon boxes? What percentage of the market do you think you can capture? Right? That's a lot of jargon in there. Of all the potential customers out there, given all the competition, which we'll talk about shortly, what percentage of those customers do you think will ultimately buy your product? And how many customers is that in terms of numbers of customers? Right? Big questions to answer. There are two ways to do this sizing: top down and bottom up. Let's start with the top down method. In this method, you start with some very large populace, like the whole population of the country. And you pare it down step by step using market research numbers to tell you X percentage do this and Y percentage do that, until you get down to a number that is the total addressable market, which is the total number of customers that would potentially buy your product or service. Let's just jump into an example to make this clearer. So for example, there are 300 million Americans. That's 320 million, but let's just round it to 300 million Americans, of which 30 million go camping. How do we know this? Well, we looked online, we found some survey data, and when you present this, you'll want to back this up by the actual name of the survey. But we found that 10% of Americans go camping, so that's 30 million Americans. Well, of those, 100,000 regularly go off-grid. Regularly don't go car camping or RV camping, but go at least a day's hike away from the trailhead and go off-grid. Again, we found this number online, and so what we're assuming here is that 10% of those will go off-grid in an area that has running water that could potentially use the product we did this top-down market sizing for. Right? And 10% was a rough guess, not based on any survey data, just based on educated guess, given the population of the country and the terrain and so forth. And so what we find out with is 10% of that market is 10,000 people. There's a potential market here of 10,000 customers for the product that is being analyzed here in this top-down research. Let's do one more. There are 70 million people that live in Kenya. That means there are 10 million non-urban households. Again, you can find this data online, take you about an hour at most. Now, each of those households need to buy 4, and I'm just going to call them widgets to obfuscate which company this is. So each household has a potential of buying 4 of these widgets, and so you multiply 4 times 10 million and you get 40 million widgets is the total addressable market in Kenya for this company. Right? Now, the problem with the top-down method is that sometimes you can't find the percentage. You can't go online, you can't go to the library, there's no source for telling you, for instance, what percentage of the people go off-grid camping. Right? Luckily, we found that number. If not, it would be a bit onerous to try and do a survey of 1 million Americans in order to find the number that go off-grid. And a survey of 100 Americans wouldn't be good enough. They wouldn't have enough statistical data in there to get that. And so that wouldn't be a survey that we could do. Sometimes what you're trying to find is whether it's 20% or 50%. You could do a survey of 100 people and answer that question if you can't find the data that someone else has done. Sometimes you just can't do it. Sometimes the data just doesn't exist, you can't do it yourself, and so you can't do the top-down method. And that's fine. In that case, do the bottom-up method. The bottom-up method is really predicated on what resources do you have. So how big is your team? How easy is it to access the market you're trying to reach? And from there, how many customers can you potentially talk to in a given day or week or month? How long will it take to make a sale? What percentage of the people that you talk to will actually make the sale, and so forth. So here we're going to basically make a bunch of assumptions. We're going to put together a model based on assumptions, and we're going to do it not based on where you are today. We're not going to base it on your company now, whether it's one person, a team of two, team of three, or so forth. We're going to do this based on somewhere out in the future at scale. We're going to assume you got over the hurdle of starting your company, and now you're making sales, and now you're out trying to grow your sales. So let's again jump into a real example to show this off. So if you're going to have one salesperson on your team, right, we're going to do bottom up, so start at the bottom of this pyramid. That salesperson, or per salesperson, you can think of this, can perhaps talk to 10 potential customers in a given month, right? And maybe this is true because each time they're talking to a customer to make a sale, there are on average 10 email they have to send and some newsletters they have to put together, or trade shows they have to go visit, or whatever. There's some issue that means they can only talk to so many customers at once, right? So from those 10, perhaps you can assume, which seems a little high, but let's just assume that half of them eventually close. So that's 5 sales per month. So if this salesperson can talk to 10 customers and close half of them, that is 60 sales per year per salesperson. Okay? And for your business, these numbers are going to be different. You'll go through and run this model on your own and do it per salesperson. Right? Include yourself if you're a salesperson. Maybe you're a half-time salesperson. Maybe you have a lot of half-time salespeople. You take those into account. And don't forget to take into account what happens after you close the sale. You may still have to talk to that customer afterwards and support them, and that will detract from having more customers. Customer conversations. Let's look at a real estate example. Let's look at perhaps a real estate like in a retail store, right? Brick and mortar kind of business. So in this model, let's start with square footage, right? This model, we're going to start with an assumption of 2,000 square feet, selling $50 on average per square foot per month. Well, that is $100,000 in revenue potential for the entire 2,000 square foot store. But reality is we took an average, but not every square foot's going to be used to sell. We may have some storage space in there. We may have some areas that are dead space in our plan, hallways and whatnot. And so you have to take a capacity factor of that. In this case, just take it by half. And that's a potential bottom-up market model of this of $50,000 per 2,000 square feet. Again, if you're looking at this as a retail store model, that certainly doesn't look like it's big enough to support a business. Okay? And maybe this is a co-working space, and maybe that's good enough for a 2,000 square foot co-working space, right? Depends on the business, depends on what your needs are of the business. But again, it shows that model is looking at constraints and how to build from constraints to dollars. Now, ideally, you can do both a top-down and a bottom-up model. And ideally, they talk about the same number at the tip of the pyramid. Right? That would be validation that you're on the right track. If you can do that, awesome. If you can't, it's fine. One or the other is fine. Right? What you want to do with this is answer the question of, is this worth doing? But we're going to take 2 more steps until we can truly answer that question.